The Omega stepped between chains to shield the Alpha at auction, and he claimed Luna before all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character, Elara Whitmore. Elara had learned long ago how to stand where no one noticed her, how to become part of the background of a place that never offered mercy to Omegas like her, and the auction square was the perfect place to disappear if you knew how. The stone floor was worn smooth by years of footsteps and waiting, and the air carried the low murmur of bargaining voices that treated lives like numbers. Elara stood near the edge with her hands folded, the simple fabric of her dress pulled tight against her wrists, not because she was cold, but because she had learned to make herself small. She was there to work, to carry ledgers, to fetch water, to do the quiet tasks that earned a few coins and no questions. No one asked her name, and no one ever did. In the center of the square stood the platform, iron rings fixed into the stone, chains resting against them like patient shadows. Elara did not look at the chains at first because she knew what they meant, and knowing too much in a place like this could break you. But the crowd shifted, and her eyes lifted despite herself. He was there, kneeling with his shoulders straight and his gaze level, as if the world had no right to bend him. The man's presence was impossible to ignore, not because he was loud or defiant, but because he was silent in a way that commanded attention. The chain at his wrists caught the light, and for a heartbeat Elara felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest, a pull she could not explain. She told herself it was nothing, just curiosity, just a passing thought, but her feet refused to move when she tried to step back. Around her, voices rose and fell, appraising, dismissive, confident, as if what stood before them was an object waiting for a price. Elara swallowed and focused on her breathing the way she always did, counting slowly, grounding herself in the present. She had survived by not interfering, by not standing out, by knowing her place. Yet as she watched the man lift his eyes, meeting the crowd without challenge or fear, she felt the fragile balance she had built begin to tilt. There was dignity there, quiet and unyielding, and it stirred something she had buried deep. Elara did not know his name or his story, only that the space between the chains felt suddenly too small for him, and that realization followed her like a whisper she could not silence as the auctioneer's voice carried across the square, and the moment that would change everything drew closer. Elara told herself again that she did not belong in moments like this, that people like her survived by keeping their heads down and their voices quiet. Yet the longer she stood there, the harder it became to pretend she was invisible. The auctioneer began speaking again, his tone smooth and practiced, describing strength and endurance as if they were features on a tool, and the crowd leaned in with interest that made Elara's stomach tighten. She shifted her weight, the stone cool beneath her worn shoes, and tried to focus on the small details she could control, the feel of her fingers pressing together, the sound of her breath, the steady rhythm that had always kept fear at bay. Still, her attention returned to the man at the center, to the calm way he held himself as voices rose around him. She noticed how his posture never collapsed inward, how even kneeling he seemed grounded, as if he carried his own sense of space that no chain could truly claim. Elara had seen many people pass through this square, most of them reduced by the process long before a price was spoken, and this difference unsettled her in a way she could not name. A bidder laughed nearby, making a careless remark that drew a ripple of amusement, and Elara felt heat rise to her face, not because the words were aimed at her, but because they revealed how easily dignity was dismissed here. She looked down, reminding herself that feeling too much was dangerous, that empathy was a luxury Omegas like her could not afford. Yet when she looked up again, she found his eyes briefly meeting hers, not with expectation or demand, but with a quiet awareness that felt startlingly direct. The moment passed quickly, but it left her unsettled, as if something had shifted under her feet. Elara turned away, intending to retreat to the edge where she belonged, but the auctioneer called for attention, signaling a change in the bidding that drew the crowd closer. Space tightened, shoulders brushing past her, and she found herself closer to the platform than she had planned. From here she could see details she had missed before, the way the man's breathing remained even, the way his gaze lifted when the crowd surged, measuring without hostility. Alara's heart beat faster, and she wondered why she cared, why this stranger's composure mattered to her when so many others had passed through unseen. She remembered the lessons she had learned early, that the world rewarded silence and punished those who stepped out of line, especially Omegas who forgot their place. Still, something inside her resisted that familiar retreat, urging her to pay attention, to acknowledge what she was witnessing. The auctioneer spoke of final terms, of conditions that would determine ownership, and Alara felt a heaviness settle in her chest that had nothing to do with fear for herself. She thought of the many small choices that defined a life, moments when one decided to look away or to stay present, and she realized she was standing at the edge of one now. Alara did not move yet, but she felt the distance between herself and the platform shrink in her mind, as if the line she had always respected was blurring. Around her, the crowd buzzed with anticipation, unaware that for one Omega standing just a few feet away, the meaning of this moment was already changing, not through noise or force, but through a growing resolve that surprised her as much as it frightened her. The bidding narrowed, voices dropping into sharper focus as the numbers climbed and then stalled, and Alara sensed the shift before she understood it, the way a room changes when attention hardens into intent. The auctioneer paused, scanning the crowd with practiced patience, inviting one more commitment, one more step that would seal a decision. Alara felt her pulse quicken as if the pause had weight, as if the air itself waited. She glanced around and saw faces she recognized from other days, merchants and patrons who spoke of strength and usefulness with detached confidence, and she wondered what they saw when they looked at the man on the platform. Did they see potential or only possession? The man lifted his chin slightly, acknowledging the moment without inviting it, and Alara was struck again by the steadiness of him, by the quiet refusal to collapse inward. It was not defiance in the loud sense, not rebellion, but something deeper, a certainty that did not ask permission. The auctioneer cleared his throat and described terms meant to reassure buyers, speaking of compliance and oversight, words designed to smooth discomfort, and a ripple of approval moved through the crowd. Alara felt her hands curl at her sides, nails pressing into her palms, grounding her as her thoughts raced. She reminded herself that this was not her concern, that involvement had never ended well for someone like her, yet the distance she had relied on felt thinner now, like a veil worn too long. The man's gaze moved again, scanning the faces nearest the platform, and when it brushed past Alara, she felt a surprising sense of recognition, not personal familiarity but shared awareness, as if they both understood the cost of this place in different ways. The auctioneer called for a final confirmation, and a voice answered from the front, confident and decisive, signaling an outcome that drew murmurs from those nearby. Alara's breath caught, not in panic, but in a quiet, aching realization that the moment was closing, that whatever might have been possible was narrowing into a single path. She watched the man's shoulders rise and fall once, a measured breath that spoke of acceptance without surrender, and she felt a question surface within her, uninvited and persistent, asking what it meant to witness something unjust and remain still. Around her, the crowd shifted again, some satisfied, others disappointed, already moving on, and Alara felt the familiar urge to step back, to let the current carry her away. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, the movement small but deliberate, as if her body had decided before her mind. The auctioneer began to outline next steps, his voice efficient, and Alara realized how close she was now, close enough to hear the subtle cadence of the man's breathing, close enough to sense the space he held even now. She thought of the rules that governed her life, the unspoken boundaries that kept her safe by keeping her silent, and she felt them press against her from all sides. Yet beneath that pressure was something else, a calm resolve forming where fear usually lived. Alara did not know what she would do or say, only that standing here, closer than she had ever allowed herself to be, felt less dangerous than walking away. The auctioneer reached the end of his statement, and the crowd's attention focused once more on the platform, unaware that for one Omega standing just within reach, the meaning of this transaction had shifted from observation to choice. and that the quiet line she had always respected was about to be crossed not by force, but by intention. Alara felt the decision settle before she fully understood it, a quiet certainty replacing the noise that had filled her thoughts moments earlier, and she took a single step forward that felt louder than any voice in the square. The movement drew no immediate reaction, which surprised her, and in that heartbeat of stillness, she realized how often the world failed to notice omegas until they disrupted an expectation. She moved again, closer now, the stone beneath her feet steady and familiar, grounding her as she crossed a boundary she had respected all her life. The auctioneer continued speaking, unaware, outlining procedures with a tone that suggested routine, but Alara's focus narrowed to the space between the iron rings and the man who knelt among them. She could feel the attention of the crowd shifting, subtle at first, a pause in murmured conversations as a few heads turned. Alara did not look at them. She fixed her gaze on the space before her, on the simple act of placing herself where she was not meant to stand. When she reached the edge of the platform, she stopped, her hands unclenching at her sides as she lifted her chin. The man looked up then, surprise flickering across his expression before settling into something steadier, a calm acknowledgement that sent a quiet tremor through her chest. Alara stood between him and the symbols that defined his situation, not touching, not interfering in any official way, simply occupying space with an intention she could no longer deny. The auctioneer's voice faltered, words trailing off as the shift became impossible to ignore, and the crowd fell into an uncertain hush. Alara felt every eye turn toward her, felt the familiar weight of judgment press against her shoulders, yet she did not retreat. She remembered every time she had stepped back, every moment she had swallowed her voice to survive, and she realized that this single choice did not erase that history, but redefined it. She was not here to argue terms or challenge authority. She was here to stand. A murmur rippled through the onlookers, confusion giving way to curiosity, and Alara sensed the tension rise like a held breath. She kept her posture steady, aware of her heartbeat without being ruled by it, aware of the man behind her without needing to look. The space between them felt charged, not with fear, but with recognition, as if her presence had unlocked a possibility neither of them had named. Alara spoke then, her voice quiet but clear, carrying farther than she expected, shaped by resolve rather than volume, and the simple truth of it cut through the uncertainty. She did not make demands or threats. She stated what she would do, where she would stand, and in doing so she altered the moment. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between her and the platform, protocol suddenly less certain, and the crowd waited for direction that did not come. Alara remained where she was, a slender line of defiance drawn not in anger but in conviction, and she felt the weight of the square shift around her. Behind her, the man breathed out slowly, the sound barely audible yet deeply grounding, and she sensed his attention settle on her with a gravity that felt both protective and questioning. Alara did not turn. She did not need to. She had already crossed the most difficult distance, the one inside herself. And as the silence stretched and the rules bent under the strain of an unexpected presence, she understood that whatever came next would not be undone by stepping back. The silence stretched longer than Alara expected, long enough that she became aware of the smallest sounds, the soft scrape of boots against stone, the distant call of a vendor beyond the square, the measured rhythm of her own breathing. It felt as though the entire space had drawn inward, waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Alara held her ground, not out of stubbornness but because moving now would feel like erasing the truth of the moment, and she had already decided she would not do that. The auctioneer shifted his stance, clearing his throat as if to reclaim authority, but the words hesitated, caught between routine and uncertainty. Alara sensed the man behind her adjust slightly, not to advance or retreat, but to align himself with the new reality her presence created. She did not need to turn to know that his attention was fully on her now, steady and intent, as if he were reading something in her choice that others could not see. A few murmurs rose from the crowd, questioning and uneasy, then faded again when no one took the lead. Alara felt the weight of their scrutiny, the familiar judgment that came with being an Omega who forgot her place. Yet beneath it was something unfamiliar, a calm that surprised her. She realized she was no longer afraid of being seen. The auctioneer tried again, his voice careful, addressing her directly for the first time, asking her to step aside, to allow the process to continue. Alara listened without reacting, letting the request pass through her as she considered the meaning behind it. Stepping aside would restore order, would return everyone to their roles, but it would also undo what had already been acknowledged by the silence itself. She spoke then, not loudly, not with anger, but with a clarity that carried, stating that she would remain where she was. The simplicity of it unsettled the crowd more than any protest could have. The auctioneer faltered, glancing toward the officials nearby, searching for guidance that did not come quickly enough. Alara felt a subtle shift in the air, a sense that the rules everyone relied on were thinner than they appeared, held together by compliance more than certainty. Behind her, the man drew a deeper breath, and she sensed something change, a quiet resonance that felt almost like recognition. He did not speak, but his presence seemed to expand, not physically, but in a way that commanded attention without force. Alara stood between him and the world that sought to define him, aware now that the act itself carried meaning beyond intention. The crowd watched, uncertain whether to challenge or retreat, and Alara felt the moment crystallize, a fragile equilibrium formed by her refusal to move and his refusal to diminish himself. She wondered how many times in history such moments had passed unnoticed because no one had stepped forward to hold them in place. The auctioneer finally fell silent, the procedures he relied on offering no solution to this unexpected variable, and the hush deepened. Alara's heart beat steadily, her resolve firming with each second that passed. She realized that even if this ended badly for her, even if consequences followed, she would carry this moment as proof that she had chosen presence over fear. The man behind her shifted his gaze outward then, no longer simply enduring the attention, but meeting it, and Alara sensed the beginning of something larger than either of them, a recognition that what had started as a transaction had become a test of values. The square remained suspended in that breathless pause, the world waiting as if aware that whatever happened next would redefine not just the outcome, but the meaning of the choice that had brought them all here. Something subtle began to change, not in the crowd but in the space itself, as if the square were remembering rules older than the ones being spoken aloud, and Alara felt it first as a warmth spreading through her chest, steady and calm rather than overwhelming. She did not understand it, only sensed that her choice had reached deeper than intention, touching something woven into the bones of the place. The man behind her shifted again, this time drawing her attention without words, and she became aware of a quiet connection forming, not emotional or intimate, but foundational, like 2 points aligning along the same axis. The auctioneer looked unsettled now, glancing toward the iron rings as if they might offer guidance, but they remained unchanged, silent witnesses to a moment they had not been designed to contain. Alara noticed the way the crowd leaned back slightly, instinctively creating space, and she realized that the tension was no longer about her presence alone. It was about uncertainty, about a sense that something beyond custom had been invoked. She heard a low murmur ripple outward, not fear but recognition, as if some among them remembered stories told quietly, warnings passed down about moments when intent and protection carried weight. Alara stayed still, hands relaxed, posture open, allowing whatever was unfolding to do so without interference. She felt the man's attention sharpen, focused not on escape or resistance, but on her, and the awareness settled between them like a shared breath. Without warning, the atmosphere shifted again, not dramatically, but with a clarity that cut through confusion. The auctioneer fell silent completely, his practiced authority failing him, and the officials nearby exchanged uncertain looks. Alara sensed that the process had reached a boundary it could not cross without acknowledging what had already occurred. She did not know the language for it, but she felt the truth of it resonate, that standing between another and harm, even symbolically, carried meaning recognized by more than law. The man behind her straightened slightly, and she felt a grounding presence anchor the moment, as if his identity were pressing gently against the surface, ready to be known. A hush settled deeper, and Alara became aware of her heartbeat syncing with something steadier, slower, as if the square itself were breathing. She realized then that this was not about defiance or rescue in the way stories often framed such acts. It was about acknowledgement, about choosing to be seen in a moment that demanded witness. The crowd watched, no longer sure who held authority, and Alara sensed that the rules they relied upon were yielding to something older, something that did not require announcement. The man drew a breath that felt different, fuller, and she felt a quiet certainty pass between them, an understanding that whatever law had been stirred recognized intention over status. Alara did not turn, but she felt his presence expand, not threatening, not aggressive, simply undeniable, and the space responded accordingly. The iron rings remained fixed, but the meaning attached to them shifted, as if they no longer defined him. Alara felt no triumph, only a steady calm, a sense that the choice she had made was being answered. The auctioneer finally stepped back, unable to proceed, and the crowd waited in silence, aware now that the moment had crossed from transaction into recognition. Alara stood at the center of it, an Omega who had stepped forward without knowing the language of the law she invoked, yet had spoken it all the same through action, and as the silence held, she understood that what had awakened could not be easily put back to sleep. The realization did not arrive as a shout or a dramatic announcement, but as a shift in how the crowd perceived the man behind Alara, a collective recognition spreading quietly as eyes sharpened and instincts stirred. Alara felt it as a steadying pressure at her back, a presence no longer constrained by circumstance but by choice, and she sensed him rise to his full height, not abruptly, but with a composed inevitability that drew attention without demanding it. The iron rings no longer defined the space. Instead, the space seemed to adjust around him, accommodating a truth that had been waiting to be acknowledged. Alara became aware of whispers forming, not accusations or bids, but names spoken cautiously, fragments of memory aligning as people connected stories they had heard with the man they now saw. The auctioneer stepped back further, his authority dissolving in the face of recognition he could not control, and officials near the platform stiffened, suddenly uncertain of their footing. Alara did not turn, yet she knew the moment had arrived, not through spectacle but through certainty, and she felt a calm settle in her chest, as if the choice she had made was now being answered in full. The man's voice carried then, low and clear, not raised, not forceful, but unmistakable, and when he spoke his name it resonated through the square with the weight of history rather than threat. Rowan Blackthorne. The name moved through the crowd like a current, drawing reactions that ranged from disbelief to dawning understanding, and Alara felt the air shift as posture changed around them, spines straightening, gazes lowering in instinctive acknowledgement. She sensed no anger from him, no desire to dominate the moment, only a calm assertion of identity that required no embellishment. Alara realized how carefully he had carried himself, how the steadiness she noticed earlier had not been defiance but discipline, the mark of someone accustomed to bearing responsibility without display. The crowd reacted unevenly, some stepping back, others bowing their heads slightly, unsure of the correct response yet unable to deny the truth settling before them. Alara felt the weight of the name not as a burden but as context, understanding now why the space had responded, why her action had carried meaning beyond intention. Rowan did not look to the officials or the auctioneer. His attention remained forward, encompassing the square without singling anyone out, and Alara sensed that his restraint was deliberate, a reminder that power did not require performance. The auctioneer attempted to speak, then stopped, words failing him, and the square fell quiet again, this time not with uncertainty, but with recognition. Alara felt a subtle warmth at her back, a grounding presence that felt protective without being possessive, and she understood that standing where she did had allowed the truth to surface without confrontation. Rowan's gaze shifted briefly, acknowledging her presence not as an accessory to the moment, but as its catalyst, and Alara felt a surprising steadiness in response, her fear replaced by clarity. She had not known who he was when she stepped forward, and that knowledge now felt irrelevant compared to why she had done so. The crowd watched, absorbing the revelation, and Alara sensed the narrative changing around them, from transaction to testimony, from ownership to acknowledgement. The square, once defined by exchange, now held witness to identity reclaimed, and Alara stood at its center, an Omega who had stepped forward without knowing the name she would help reveal, yet had recognized the truth of him all the same. The moment settled into clarity as Rowan stepped forward, the movement unhurried yet decisive, and Alara felt the space respond as if it recognized him fully now, making room without resistance. He reached the edge of the platform and paused, not to command attention, but to allow the square to steady around what was about to be spoken. Alara became acutely aware of her place, of how close she stood to him, and yet there was no urge to retreat, only a quiet readiness that surprised her. Rowan removed his outer cloak with deliberate care, the fabric heavy and marked by travel rather than ornament, and placed it around Alara's shoulders, a simple gesture that carried unmistakable meaning. The warmth settled over her, grounding and calm, and the crowd reacted with a collective intake of breath, understanding dawning not through spectacle but through context. Rowan turned then, facing the square fully, his posture composed, his gaze level, and when he spoke his voice carried without force, clear and resonant, shaped by certainty rather than volume. He stated his claim plainly, not as ownership but as recognition, declaring Alara Whitmore his Luna before all, by choice and by law older than any contract spoken that day. The words did not echo with threat or demand. They settled into the air like a truth that had found its moment. Alara felt the declaration as a steady alignment rather than a shock, a sense of being seen not for her rank but for her choice, and she realized that nothing in her life had prepared her for the calm that followed. The crowd reacted in waves, some bowing their heads instinctively, others stepping back in respect, all understanding that the terms of the day had been irrevocably altered. Officials stood frozen, protocol dissolving in the face of a declaration they could not contest, and the auctioneer lowered his gaze, the transaction rendered meaningless by the clarity of Rowan's words. Alara felt Rowan's presence beside her, not looming or possessive, but steady, as if his claim was an invitation to stand rather than an order to follow. He did not grip her arm or pull her closer. Instead, he offered his hand, palm open, a gesture of choice witnessed by the entire square. Alara looked at it for a brief moment, feeling the weight of what it represented, then placed her hand in his, the contact grounding and unambiguous. The reaction was immediate yet restrained, a ripple of acknowledgement passing through the crowd, as if they had been waiting for this final confirmation. Rowan inclined his head slightly, not to the officials or the onlookers, but to Alara, a quiet acknowledgement that underscored the meaning of his claim. Alara felt her breath steady, her fear replaced by clarity, and she realized that the courage she had summoned earlier had not been spent but transformed. The square no longer felt hostile or uncertain. It felt witnessed, a place where an unspoken law had been honored openly. Rowan spoke once more, briefly, stating that the matter was concluded, his tone calm and final, and the crowd accepted it not because they were forced to but because the truth of the moment left no room for dispute. Alara stood beside him, cloak warm on her shoulders, hands steady in his, understanding that whatever came next would unfold from this moment of public recognition, where choice had been honored and dignity affirmed before all. The square did not erupt into chaos or celebration after the declaration. Instead, it settled into a profound stillness, the kind that followed moments history would later name as turning points. Alara stood beside Rowan, her hand still in his, cloak resting on her shoulders like a promise she was only beginning to understand. She felt the weight of many gazes, yet none of them pressed her down anymore. They observed her differently now, not as an Omega meant to be overlooked, but as someone whose choice had altered the course of an outcome that once seemed inevitable. Rowan guided her forward with a gentle pressure, not pulling, simply inviting movement, and the crowd parted without being asked, instinct guiding them where orders once ruled. As they walked, Alara noticed how the stone beneath her feet felt different, steadier, as if the ground itself acknowledged the shift. She caught fragments of whispered conversation, not speculation but quiet awe, the kind reserved for moments that redefined belief. Rowan paused at the edge of the square, turning slightly, so that his presence encompassed Alara without isolating her, and she realized he was careful not to eclipse her, not to let his authority erase the significance of her action. He spoke briefly to the officials, not with reprimand but with finality, ensuring there would be no attempt to undo what had been claimed openly. They nodded, subdued, understanding that resistance here would serve no one. Alara felt a strange mix of emotions, relief braided with uncertainty, courage giving way to reflection. She had not stepped forward expecting a future to unfold at her feet. She had stepped forward because remaining still had felt impossible. Rowan leaned closer then, his voice low and meant only for her, thanking her not for loyalty or obedience but for choice, for seeing him when circumstances had demanded silence. The words settled gently, affirming rather than overwhelming, and Alara felt her spine straighten as if her body recognized the truth of them. Together they moved beyond the square, leaving behind a space that had transformed from a marketplace into a witness. As they crossed into the quieter streets beyond, Alara glanced back once, taking in the sight of people standing where moments earlier they had judged and bid, now subdued by understanding. She did not feel triumph or vengeance, only a calm certainty that something had been restored. Rowan slowed their pace, ensuring she was comfortable, his attention attentive without being intrusive, and Alara realized that the safety she felt did not come from power alone, but from respect. The future loomed ahead, undefined and vast, yet it did not intimidate her as she once imagined it would. She had already faced the most daunting threshold, the moment where fear and action met, and she had chosen to act. Rowan spoke quietly of what would come next, not plans imposed but paths offered, and Alara listened, grounding herself in the reality of choice continuing beyond the square. She understood now that being Luna would not erase her past or the lessons learned within it, but it would allow her to carry them forward with purpose. As they walked, the sounds of the city resumed, ordinary life continuing around an extraordinary shift, and Alara felt a steady warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with ceremony. She had stepped between chains without knowing where it would lead, and in doing so she had discovered not only Rowan's true identity, but her own. The path ahead remained unwritten, yet it no longer belonged to fear or silence. It belonged to a choice made openly, witnessed by many, and carried forward with dignity. As Alara Whitmore walked beside Rowan Blackthorn, not as someone rescued, but as someone recognized, the beginning of a destiny shaped not by circumstance, but by courage.